okay, here I am. Let's do it. Time for the Stand Up with Pete Dominick podcast. Joining me on the program today, Clint Watts, national security expert, former FBI, former Army infantry. You see him on MSNBC, which is where I met him. He's on the old show a bunch of times. Really smart guy. Also, speaking of smart, Michael Cohen is a Boston Globe columnist. I had a fascinating conversation with him. Can't wait to share that with you. Friday, it looks like I'm going to get the great Peter Coyote to join me. Who else do you want to hear on this podcast? Let me know, and I'll reach out to them, and we'll have a conversation. Learning new things, growing together, inspiring each other, informing, enlightening, entertaining, hopefully. And now, so many of you supporting me on Patreon, and I cannot thank you enough for the patreon.com/Pete Dominick subscriptions. I work for you now, is the way I see it. 3 podcasts a week, trying to make them better, more interesting, more enlightening every week, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday when you can hear them. Tell your friends. Also, listen to me on the Judy Gold podcast, Kill Me Now. Sat down with her, and it was really, really fun. It's Wednesday, the 26th of November, and I've also got Aaron Carroll, a clip of Aaron Carroll debunking the whole turkey makes you tired myth that we did pretty much every year with him, and I'll play that for you coming up in a second. But a few other audio clips that I want to go through with you in case you missed them. These are fun and entertaining or enraging. You got to hear. Here is what was in the zeitgeist yesterday, and the media zeitgeist, if you will. DNC Vice Chair Michael Blake, who happens to be a black guy, was invited on to Fox News, and Bill Hemmer had him on and referenced Tucker Carlson predicting that former First Lady Michelle Obama was going to enter the 2020 race. And Michael Blake's response is awesome. Here it is.
Tucker Carlson with a bold prediction saying Michelle Obama just may be the Democratic ticket next year, despite the former First Lady saying she's not interested. Michael Blake, Vice Chair of the DNC and a New York State Assemblyman. How you doing, Mike? Nice to see you, sir. What do you think of the prediction on Michelle Obama? Would you like to see that?
Well, she's not running, but the core question is, why the hell does Tucker Carlson still have a job here in the first place? The reality is, this is someone who said white supremacy is a hoax, and why does Fox allow him to still be here in the first place?
All right. Well, I mean, his opinion there is that Michelle Obama may get in this race. Do you think that will happen, or
it's not going to happen? It's not going to happen. But I think the core question is he shouldn't be on here at all.
I get it. We didn't bring you on to talk about Tucker Carlson. I brought you on to talk about the Democratic field. But are you happy right now with what you see in
Bill Hemmer just plowing ahead? Are you happy now? And the guy just wanted to keep pounding Bill Hemmer and Fox News for having a white supremacist on every single night. I love that one. And much respect to Michael Blake. I'm a big fan now. Check him out. He's the DNC vice chair. I always love it when people go on networks and slam the network. That's always really entertaining and cringy and brave, because you're probably not getting invited back on again. Look up Lee Camp on Fox News. That's a good one. Also on Fox News was the outgoing Secretary of Energy, Rick Perry, who revealed in an interview over the weekend that he believes President Trump is the chosen one who was sent by God to lead us. That's right. The former governor of Texas, Rick Perry, sat down with his glasses on Fox News, and here is this amazing, crazy, enraging, scary clip.
Saul wasn't perfect. Solomon wasn't perfect. And I actually gave the president a little one-pager on those Old Testament kings about a month ago. And I shared it with him. I said, Mr. President, I know there are people that say, you said you were the chosen one. And I said, you were. I said, if you're a believing Christian, you understand God's plan for the people who rule and judge over us on this planet in our government.
And less people on the left attack Rick Perry. He pointed out to me, he believes Barack Obama was sent
by
God as well. He said for that moment and that time. He said he thinks for this moment and this time, Donald Trump was sent by God.
Right. Okay. God is choosing that whole. This is the kind of thing that enrages atheists and secular types, because this idea that God is choosing the president of the United States. Andy Ostroy, who I love on Twitter at Andy Ostroy, writes, right, God sent at real Donald Trump here to bang porn stars, grab pussies, sexually assault women, mock disabled people, lie, cheat, steal, bully, foment hatred and racism, cage children, separate families, and betray America. Hashtag Rick Perry. Hashtag Trump. Good job, Andy Ostroy. Love that guy. Okay, so that's another clip there. Rick Perry, just another person claiming that God chose the president. Makes a lot of sense. You probably heard this one, right? The First Lady, who it's hard to believe his name is Melania Trump, was booed for almost, I don't know if it was the whole time, nearly a minute at an opioid event at a high school in Baltimore. Listen to this.
My pleasure to introduce to you the First Lady of the United States of America.
Jim, for the warm introduction and for inviting me to join you today for such an important event centered on opioid awareness. Hello, everyone. Thank you to DEA 360. The knowledge you gain here will help you tackle the tough decisions you may face with so that you can live a healthy and drug-free life.
Okay, well, she got booed, and that is rough. And it was it appropriate? I mean, what do you think? What do you think? I got no problem with it. I'm sorry. She's the whole thing is terrible. I can't take it. It's sad, but that's where we're at. Also this, UN warning about rising carbon emissions. I got to play this for you. A major new report from the United Nations warns that countries around the world aren't doing enough to control the CO2 emissions that are warming the climate. And that's a real terrifying thing. Here is CBS.
New findings from the United Nations offer a grim assessment of how off track the world is in combating climate change. The UN's annual emissions gap reports that it takes a look at the difference between the world's current path and the changes needed to meet the goals of the 2015 Paris Climate Accord. The 2019 report says that global temperatures are on pace to rise as much as 3.2 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. It also says that G20 nations account for 78% of all emissions, while 15 members still have not committed to a timeline for net zero emissions. Overall, the report warns that transformations and actions must be taken now. Well, the UN Secretary General says failure to heed these warnings and take drastic action to reverse emissions means we're going to continue to witness deadly and catastrophic heat waves, storms, and pollution. CBS News.
All right, and then she goes to the expert, the analyst. Anyway, I'm sorry I don't have that anchor's name, but CBS News. So that's a huge story, of course, this week as well. Another major new alarm sounding that we are in real serious trouble, setting new records for CO2 emissions. We've got to do something a long time ago. All right, well, I don't want to depress you right there on that note. Let's have a little fun by debunking a myth that we like to do every time around this year. Thanksgiving is tomorrow, and you're probably traveling, listening to this, and I appreciate it very much, but you got to listen to Dr. Carroll. Here he is. I edited this a little bit. I edited out the intro. Sorry, Aaron. But here is Dr. Carroll debunking, busting the myth that turkey makes you sleepy.
It's Thanksgiving, and while it's a time when many of you will gather with family and appreciate the good things in life, it's nothing but frustration for me. That's not because I don't like gathering with my family or because I don't have a lot to be thankful for. I do. It's because Thanksgiving is the time when I'm forced to hear over and over and over again the pernicious myth that turkey makes you sleepy. It doesn't. That's wrong. The myth that turkey makes you sleepy is so pervasive that I bet you even think you have a scientific explanation for it. It's the tryptophan. And it's true that L-tryptophan is sold as a dietary supplement to help you sleep. But it's there that the facts stop supporting this lie. Let's start with the fact that turkey doesn't have that much tryptophan in it. In fact, chicken and ground beef have the same amount of tryptophan in them, about 350 milligrams per 4-ounce serving. It turns out that cheese and pork actually have more tryptophan in them than turkey does. But no one ever claims that the ham and cheese sandwich made them sleepy. No, it's always the turkey. Then let's move on to the fact that the amount of tryptophan in turkey is much less than the amount that's recommended to help you sleep. Some sources say you need 1,000 milligrams or more, which means you'd have to eat more than 3/4 of a pound of turkey just to get that much tryptophan. Most people don't eat that much in a sitting, even at a Thanksgiving dinner. It gets worse. If you buy tryptophan as a sleep aid and look at the side of the box, it's likely you'll see instructions telling you to take it on an empty stomach. Why? Because tryptophan is poorly absorbed with food, especially with a big meal. In other words, if you wanted to use turkey as a delivery system for tryptophan, getting it from a big Thanksgiving meal is going to be really ineffective. There's nothing about this myth that makes sense. Of course, there are plenty of other reasons that you might get sleepy on Thanksgiving. Big meals can cause drowsiness. So can alcohol. So can a case of not wanting to do the dishes. Also, the Thanksgiving Day Parade is extremely boring. So blame your sleepiness on any of these things. Just don't blame it on the turkey. Admit to yourself that the turkey was delicious, make yourself a Miles Standish, loosen your belt, and take a nap. Maybe you'll luck out and miss the parade.
Thank you, Dr. Aaron Carroll. Check out his YouTube channel, Healthcare Triage, for a lot more of where that came from. Share it with your friends. You'll sound really smart on Thanksgiving, or you'll just piss everybody off like I always do with science and research. Okay, now it's time for my conversation with the Boston Globe's Michael Cohen. Now we are recording, and joining me is one of my all-time favorite people to talk to on the old show. Really smart guy. First discovered him on Twitter. I loved reading his tweets at SpeechBoy71. So I gave him the strong Pete Dominic follow, did the thing where you click on the link to learn more about the person. I found out it was Boston Globe columnist and author Michael Cohen, who I'm very excited to have joining the podcast for the first time. He's written in 2016, American Maelstrom, the 1968 election and the politics of division, and most recently co-authored with Mika Zenko, Clear and Present Safety, The World Has Never Been Better, and why that matters to Americans. Also a fan and subscriber of his Boston Globe newsletter, Truth and Consequences. Michael Cohen on the line right now. Very happy to have you here, to be in conversation with you. You're not here, but
it's great to be here. Be here virtually.
I will take you any way I can get you. All of you. All of it. Michael, oh, there's so much to discuss with you. And I was just preparing to interview you. As I do, I prep a lot. And I saw in your bio and thought it was relevant that you once worked at the State Department. And that can probably explain also your Twitter handle. What did you do and who did you do it for at the State Department?
I was a speechwriter. State Department. I worked for a guy named Bill Richardson, who was ambassador to the UN. And then I worked for another guy named Stuart Eisenstadt, who was a undersecretary for economic affairs. And I was speechwriter for both of them for 2 years. I did that in the Clinton administration.
You worked at the State Department? You went to the State Department?
I did, every day. Mm-hmm.
How was that experience? How do you look back at your time there and think about it?
It was a great job, actually. I mean, I was pretty young when I did it. I really enjoyed it. The people there are, and this is something that I thought, came across in these impeachment hearings. The people who work there there's some extraordinarily talented people who work in the Foreign Service. People who really, make a career out of basically being in the professional sort of national security bureaucracy. And it's a really extraordinary thing. And it was a great opportunity. It was a great experience. Just met a lot of amazing people and learned a ton. I mean, the best part of that job was I was in my 20s doing it, and I just learned so much about foreign policy, so much about how government operates. It was fascinating. Fascinating job.
I was going to ask you. That's what I was going to ask you. What came across? That's why I was trying to tie it up, but you already did it. In terms of watching the impeachment hearings and seeing these people, these diplomats, these foreign service officers, and seeing how they came across and how they testified and how, it was unfiltered on C-SPAN. It wasn't spun. Later on, of course, everybody embeds it in their shows. But I think that it would be interesting. I want to do a documentary about the State Department and how it works, like really get in the bowels and go to the different country desks. Like there's a Vietnam section, right? There's a place for every country in our relationship with them. Wouldn't it be fascinating for the public to kind of learn about how the State Department works, so it's not just some nameless, faceless bureaucrats?
I mean, I think what's interesting about it is like, it's, first of all, the federal government, obviously most people who work in the federal government are, they're nonpartisan public servants. And, this is, in the state, and there's always like a small number of political appointees, people who were selected by the White House and the president to basically serve in these agencies. But at the State Department, to be in the Foreign Service, which is what it means to be sort of a public, servant there, you go through a lot to do it. It's really, really hard. You go through testing. You go through a serious process, and very few people make it to the point where they can actually be in the Foreign Service. So the people that are there are sort of the creme de la creme. I mean, they're really talented, smart people. And one thing it's different. I was a political appointee, and one thing you sort of figure out when you're there is that you're very much in the minority, because people there, they don't. I was there during the whole Clinton impeachment. People try to sort of keep their political opinions to themselves. They focus on the job. Yeah. They focus on what they're doing, their responsibilities. And, what's also interesting about it, too, is that people may spend, a whole period of time doing, the Middle East or doing Russia, and then all of a sudden they do something different, and they go to a different part of the world or different embassy or different bureau. It is people who are just really extraordinarily talented. And as a documentary, it might not be the most exciting thing in the world, because they're basically bureaucrats. And so you have to really be interested in sort of the minutia of foreign policy, the minutia of like the policy process. But one thing that I was struck by was watching.
If I did it, it would be really interesting, because I'm really talented, and I would like interview some bureaucrat in a tanning bed.
Oh yeah,
kind of,
And many of them could use a tan, actually. So that would be a useful thing to do.
What are you saying? There's not enough diversity in the State Department?
I definitely am saying that. There's a lot of paleness in the.
I would think there'd be a lot, because I would think there'd be all these different people that speak different languages and come from those countries that are probably most likely American. But I mean, is it mostly very well educated white folks?
That was at least my experience. That was the case. And keep in mind,
it was a long time ago, though. I bet you that changed with Obama. I think.
What? I honestly don't. I doubt it's changed all that much. I think part of the problem is that to get to be in a position, you have to go. You have to have a master's degree. You have to have gone to an elite university. You probably spent time overseas. I mean, it's something that you have to have a certain amount of money to be able to even get a position of being able to get a job like that.
Oh, wow. So what is it now? I am interested, though, because the idea of statecraft is fascinating. Isn't that what you do at the State Department? Statecrafting?
There is, but there's also, I mean, a lot of it is just sort of the day-to-day relationships. Like I used to work with a lot of people. I was working for the U.S. ambassador to the UN. So I dealt with a lot of the bureaucrats who worked at the embassy in New York. So these are people who basically are tracking the issues that are the most that they're responsible for. It could be political issues, economic issues that are happening at the UN. They have to be in touch with other countries. They attend meetings. They attend all kinds of roundtable conversations, all kinds of things that are sort of just the day to day of tracking and understanding the issues that you're dealing with. So it's a lot of like academic kind of work almost in a way. I mean, it's also a lot of relationship building. Especially if you're in an embassy, you need to keep in touch with the people who work in your counterparts in agencies and institutions that you deal with. But it's a lot of just like sort of day-to-day diplomacy, and also just kind of being able to understand and track the issues that are important to you, and then translate that and communicate that to your ambassadors, the bureaus back in Washington. I mean, to policymakers. It's much more of like you're sort of you're kind of doing the grunt work in a lot of ways if you're in these houses. Now, the further up the ranks you go, then you end up becoming more of a policy decider, a policy maker. For a lot of the foreign service, it's really just about again, doing the sort of day-to-day work. And I was struck by David Holmes, who testified the last day about overhearing the conversation with Gordon Sondland. I mean, his job was as a note taker. I mean, his job was to sort of be attending meetings with
That's a high level job, though. Even it sounds like it's like a secretary or something, but note taker is a high level, or is it not?
I mean, it is and it isn't. I mean, it's an important job in the sense that you are somebody who is sort of tracking the policy, tracking these meetings. You're communicating with the ambassador. You're communicating with the bureaus back in Washington. I mean, you're helping, keep the trains running to some extent. And I was struck by his testimony of how much he sort of understood about what was happening on this Ukraine policy, and also didn't understand it because obviously there were things that were being decided back at the White House, but was trying to sort of figure out what the policy was, what was going on, while at the same time they're trying to do his job. So, I mean, I think he's more of a lower level person, but I was just struck by listening to him about, how much of what he was describing is what so many members of the Foreign Service do on a regular basis.
How much of what the Foreign Service, what the State Department, how much of what our foreign policy is influenced by private sector corporate interests in the U.S. in terms of where they can make money and how they can push and pull and tap resources and exploit people and interfere in other countries' democracies, and how much of it is really more about kind of more general and more noble, what we want it to be, human rights. And I think most people, at least we used to agree on spreading democracy and free speech. Like, how would you talk about how it was then or how it differs at all? Is that way too big of a question, the corporate interests that we all believe are involved versus kind of the human rights and spreading of democracy that you hope it would be?
I mean, I think that's more of a Commerce Department thing. I mean, I think to some extent, the State Department is much more focused on policy. They're not focused on, doing carrying water for corporate interests. At the same time, having said that, a lot of what they'll do is make sure that the places that, if you're in the Ukraine, or if you're in China or wherever else it may be, I mean, you're trying to help American businesses to some extent. You're trying to smooth the process for them so they can do business there. You're trying to work with maybe the host government to ensure that, they adhere to the rule of law so American businesses feel comfortable operating in these countries. So that's really part of it. But I mean, I think talking about human rights and democracy, a big part of what State Department does are those kinds of issues. I mean, there's a whole bureau devoted to human rights. I mean, that's it's called DRL. And that's what it's democracy, human rights, and labor. And that's their mission. That's what they do on a regular basis. And
it's now run by Sheriff Joe Arpaio.
No, it is not. I'm Sheriff Joe Arpaio. Can you imagine? Jeez.
Yes, I can. I can imagine everything now. There's nothing I can't imagine.
It's funny. Someone said the same thing to me this morning, and it's funny about that. Like, there really is no I can't believe anymore, is there? Like, I can't believe that happened. And yet it happens on an almost daily basis.
My friend Aaron Carroll. Do you know Aaron Carroll? Sure. He tweets a lot, and I think this is some of what he means. He often tweets, probably daily, there is no bottom.
No, there's no bottom. There's no bottom. And every time you think there is a bottom, we dig deeper.
Yeah.
It's an amazing thing.
Yeah.
I kind of felt there are various points, like I remember thinking a year and a half ago that when the stories about the kids in cages happened, like, that's rock bottom. And yet there's more. There's more.
Yeah, the defense of the war criminal, and now the campaigning with a war criminal, or maybe we shouldn't call him that because, he was found innocent by his peers in a military trial, I guess, but he's found guilty of posing with a dead ISIS. Whatever, this guy Gallagher, I'm not going to say that's necessarily worse than caging kids, but it's to your point of there is no bottom. Like, there's every day there is some horrific, shameful, embarrassing, cringeworthy, and other adjectives thing that the president says or does, and that people then go on TV and defend.
I know. I mean, in fact, there were 3 people who were pardoned. 2 of them were convicted of actual war crimes. 2 of them were convicted.
Good point.
And Gallagher has engaged in just the most extraordinary insubordination. At the same time, the Navy's trying to decide to take away his trident pin. And what's crazy is that he's doing this knowing he can get away with it because Trump will defend him. And
is there anybody? I was
just say that what gets me about this, that upsets me so much, is that this guy, Trump, thinks he is doing this to, as a pro-military move. And I just think any member of the military who is okay with what Trump is doing has dishonored their position and dishonored the military. Because to basically say that he's going to overrule the command decisions of the Navy officials, he's going to override the decisions of military justice, is basically saying that people in the military can break the law. They can commit war crimes and get away with it. And you understand, like, I don't think people understand this fully, that we spend so much time and effort with our military training them to abide by the laws of armed combat. So much time and effort. And when people are prosecuted in the military justice system, it's because they've done something to violate those laws. And Trump is basically saying he doesn't care and it's okay.
He's appealing to that segment of the population that wants to nuke them all and let God sort it out. That segment of the population that thinks that the United States military is almighty and can do no wrong, and that will argue it's war, there shouldn't be any rules. But of course, I think the argument that has been so convincing to me over the years, made by members of the military and those who interrogated people with traditional techniques on the issue of torture. It was, if we torture ISIS members, Al-Qaeda members, then ISIS and Al-Qaeda members have every right in their moral standing to torture American Marines and Navy SEALs and members and women, female, and rape. Like, it makes us no better than them.
Of how we fight wars.
Why does that matter? Why does that matter if we're not? I mean, why is that not a convincing argument to the people who just want to nuke them all?
Transformations in history, in human history, right? I mean, think about the atrocities that were committed, not just World War II, but 30, 40 years ago on a regular basis by the way, by the United States in Vietnam. I mean, we did, but we don't do that anymore. Right. That's what.
In every war, every country commits horrific war crimes. We can argue who's better or worse, but certainly, we firebombed an entire German city.
But also recognition that those acts are war crimes.
Right, because you call it transformation. I would call it some kind of human evolution. At the same time, we've got all these nukes ready to kill everybody.
I remember a couple years ago when it was happened in Afghanistan, when a U.S. gunship by accident bombed in a hospital. Right. And that they thought was contained, they thought was actually where Taliban soldiers were, but actually was a hospital. And people started accusing them of war crimes. And I always say this point: this is not a war crime. A war crime is when you purposely target civilians. This was not a purposeful act. This was an accident. And of course, that doesn't make every people who got killed. It was a horrible accident. People should be held responsible for it. But it's a very different thing than what would have happened, in the past, when literally we bombed civilians on purpose, in part to terrorize them. That's a huge transformation. We go to incredible length in this country to not harm civilians. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but we try, make every effort to not do it. And what's basically Trump is saying is that's wrong. It's okay to kill civilians. It's okay to commit atrocity because there's some childlike idea of what needs to become military. There you go.
Right, and it's doing tremendous damage. And I think what you said about anybody who's in the military. I heard a military spouse call into NPR, because I listened to the NPR, and she was horrified by it. And everybody seems to be, and the Secretary of the Navy was, and all of the military folks who are on TV and radio overwhelmingly seem to be, except for that scoundrel, that Pete Hegseth, who's like just profiting off this weird, and all the guys I know in the military despise him and are open and public about it. But I don't see, Michael Cohen, a real split in the military community, active duty, their families, because their families are worried about their husbands and wives that are in the military. Like, everybody sees this as a very bad thing, except for Trump and the supporters that only listen to Trump. And
they actually muddled with his sniper, with his rifle, so he couldn't use it to kill civilians, because he was killing civilians with a sniper rifle. Okay, those men who did that, who came out and spoke out and turned Gallagher in, they are heroes. They're heroes, not Eddie Gallagher.
And any police officer or anybody else who's in, I understand that brotherhood, that fraternity of being feeling like you're always under fire and under threat and wanting to back each other up. If you don't back each other up, the next time someone's firing at you, you never know what's going to happen. I get that. I understand that. That's why it makes it so much more difficult to turn people in. That's why overwhelmingly you believe them, because just the motive, it's a preposterous
I couldn't agree with you more.
ulterior motive to suspect that they just did it because they didn't like the guy's orders or that they didn't like him. You ruined the whole code that they live by.
And by Pete Hegseth, but of course I'm not going to happen. That Eddie Gallagher, who is frankly like a terrible person who killed civilians.
Well, they
killed innocent civilians.
Yeah.
He should be in jail for the rest of his life.
Yes, it gives the military such a bad name and does such a disservice to our foreign policy. I mean, remember that guy who lost his mind in Afghanistan while on active duty and went around a village and shot up a whole bunch of innocent people in their homes? It was one of them. What that did, all these things, they set us back so badly from Abu Ghraib to torture to the wars themselves, and they do such a disservice to to our reputation. It'll take a generation, if ever, to recover from, if ever. I mean, certain people will always see us.
Look at the damage that Abu Ghraib did, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, that was everyone agreed those were war crimes. Everyone agreed that was wrong, and so in Guantanamo. And this is worse because it's not just a question of like these atrocities occurred, but the President of the United States, Commander in Chief, is saying it's okay.
Yes, that's the point. I'm glad that you made that point, because that's what all of the other horrific things that we've done, even like you said, when they were by accident, you apologize at the lowest, you make amends for it.
Absolutely.
We're not denying necessarily that he did these things. Certainly his own Navy SEALs are accusing him of them, and the president isn't either, and he's just letting them go, rewarding it, which changes the way
them. That's the point. Rewarding them.
What does that do to the fabric of an agreed upon morality in America or anywhere?
Nothing good.
So let me ask you about some of your most recent columns. Michael Cohen is a columnist at the Boston Globe, and I really liked this piece titled "Why Aren't People Taking to the Streets for Impeachment?" And you point out how human beings all over the world, in Lebanon, in the UK, in Chile, in Egypt, have taken to the street. Of course, Hong Kong, like every weekend, is the most explicit example, one might argue. What's the difference in America?
What is the difference? Well, I mean, it's a great question, and I didn't get a good. I'm not sure I came up with a compelling answer as to what the difference is. I mean, I think there's a couple of different reasons why we're not protesting. I think one is that we have a tradition in this country. There's not a big protest culture in this country. I think and that's in a part a good thing, and I mean that in the sense that we have an expectation in America that you can solve problems at the ballot box, right? We have the longest democratic tradition of any country in the world, right? We've been a democracy for 240 some years. We resolve things by elections. And so I think people don't have this notion that you go in the streets and you protest and the leader steps down. That's just not something that you do here. And then I think about the fact that there are protests in Egypt, protests in Hong Kong, places where literally there is no other outlet for political protest than to go into the streets. There's no politics. There's no democracy in Egypt. If you want to protest what's happening, you basically have to go out the streets. And largely that's true in Hong Kong also. Although there, of course, were elections this week, and the reformers, the opposition to the government did quite well. But I think that here, that's just it's a different system here. But I think also, and look, I think you have to give credit to Americans too. I mean, the Women's March was an extraordinary protest. Even the War on Science, the March for the Living, all of these were amazing protests. Yeah, the Planet March this was just a few months ago. I think the difference is that on impeachment, it's I'm not quite. Maybe people just haven't. The process hasn't gone far enough along. I mean, I think maybe when you get to the Senate, maybe when the votes are coming in the House on impeachment, you'll see more protests.
Right.
But having said that, there is something. I don't know. Maybe people just are exhausted by all of this. By the way, which makes a lot of sense. Also, I mean, it is exhausting to follow Trump and to try to maintain your outrage about the stuff that he's been doing.
Yeah, it's been it's got to be really difficult for anybody, including people whose entire job it is to write about them, to follow it day to day. It was interesting. While I was traveling a lot the first week of the impeachment hearings, and everybody on the airplane had it on their screen. You saw people taking pictures like that, sharing it on social media. It was on at bars and restaurants and so on. So it does seem that, at least anecdotally, and I think that the ratings said, even though it was interesting that Devin Nunes and the president and others tried to poo-poo the ratings like that's a thing, but that people were watching them. But to answer your question that you posed in your column at the Boston Globe, why aren't people taking to the streets for impeachment? I guess my answer is it's not over. Like, we'll see if the House votes, how it votes, what they come up with, and then see what the hell the circus in the Senate is or isn't about. But then after that, I don't know, maybe because we're in an election campaign, people want to put their energy there.
I mean, that's part of it too. I mean, I think part of it's people are more focused. I think people don't think that impeachment's going to end up with Trump's removal from office, and I think that's probably correct. And so the focus is how do you defeat him in 2020? I think that's part of it. I think also, I wrote that piece before we even had public hearings. But I mean, I'm struck by the fact that you had hearing people, I think, were paying attention to them. And then you have this poll up from CNN today that shows public opinion has not moved at all. Like, not
really?
Even 1 point. It was
on
50%
impeachment
from a month ago is the same numbers, 50-43 support versus 43 opposed, which is still pretty crazy that majority of the country wants to see Trump impeached and removed. But, the number hasn't moved.
How could that be?
I think it speaks to why Republicans are supporting Trump, because their voters are going to continue to support Trump, and no matter what he does. And that line he had about I'm going to shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue. It was the only true thing he's ever said. I mean,
yeah, I saw some woman defend it recently somewhere in some focus group. She's like, it would depend on why he shot him. I mean, really, she said on one of the cable networks. I was like, yeah, because you can always defend it. Although it is fascinating to see that there's nobody apparently in the Republican Party in Congress, in the House or Senate, that really, outside of like a Justin Amash who's left the party, what they're doing is they're taking the Russian intelligence service narrative and they are selling it. And that is either something you believe, I guess, or something that you don't. But the United States Senate has been briefed on that. They know that that's what's happening. And the idea that they're selling this narrative, which Putin and the GRU created, that it was Ukraine that interfered and for Hillary Clinton versus, of course, Russia. We have the names of the actual guys sitting at the actual computers. There's so much good journalism.
It was an indictment done by Mueller that actually lays out who they are.
So what do you make of the fact that Republicans, they know that this is the Russian policy to divide America? Because my conclusion is that at this point, whatever it takes to win an election so that you get the judges and policies that you want, it doesn't matter who's helping you. Welcome foreign interference, welcome corruption, as long as we get what we want. It's not liberal versus conservative, Democrat versus Republican. It seems it's principled versus unprincipled.
Well, I mean, it is, but it's also, I think, just pure partisanship. There was this interview with
partisanship isn't I'll do anything to win. Partisanship is what do you mean? Like,
that's what it's become.
Right.
It's become okay. So I'll give you that. So there was Rich Lowry, who's
I know him well. Yeah, the National Review guy used to come on the show a lot, and we didn't get along very well. That
seems right. He has a new book out. He did an interview at Fox, and
I read that.
And he made some quote about that. He's like, I don't like the fact that Trump doesn't abide by the Constitution. I don't like the fact that he doesn't abide with separation of powers. I don't like the fact that you can't control him, but better him than a Democratic president like Elizabeth Warren. And
that's Lowry's point of view: is giving up on these principles is still better than
Democrat in the White House. and I really, I tweeted this out. I said I almost found it refreshing that the honesty of saying that you'd rather have a unaccountable, corrupt, law-breaking president than have a Democrat who would abide by the law and would not be corrupt. And that's basically what it comes down to, that Republicans would rather have a Republican president than even one that is a serial violator of the Constitution. They'd rather have that than a Democrat. I don't think Democrats would do the same, feel the same way, although maybe they would. I don't. It's possible, but certainly that's how Republicans feel, and I think that's how they justify it. I think it's that.
But inviting a foreign country to
but Pete, hold on, but that president then gets to appoint conservative judges and cuts taxes for wealthy people, and most important, like, upsets liberals, which is really the most important thing for conservatives, is to upset liberals and not give it. Like, if you agree to impeach Trump, then Democrats would win. Yeah. Can you imagine how awful these Democrats were to win? You can't have that. You gotta have you gotta stay. That's the mindset.
If Trump wins, he can't win.
Of course he can win. Of course he can win. What this is? Look, I wrote this piece over the weekend, and this I think is the bottom line issue here. You have a president who basically can break the law, who can abuse his power and not be held accountable, and then get reelected. You do not have a democracy. You have an authoritarian government. You have a president who can do whatever the hell he wants to do. Can use it, can subvert an election, which he's done now. Well, now he did in 2016, trying to do in 2020. Again, abuse his power, violate the law, violate the most basic democratic norms, and literally operate with complete and total impunity. That's not a democracy.
What brings you joy?
What brings me joy? My kids, my dog, not politics.
Do you enjoy writing about it?
I do. I mean, yes, I do. Because, it's like, it's tough to write about it. It's depressing. But, I always say this, that I feel very humbled to have a platform in a time of, I think, true national crisis, to have a platform which to talk about this stuff is very humbling and something that I really appreciate. And, also, I love to do this. I mean, I love to write. I love to express my opinion. I love to, to put ideas out there. And I think that's why you do a job like this, and especially in a moment like this. But do I wish that I write about more boring stuff? Yes, I do. And I wish that I didn't have to write about things that truly upset me and truly depress me. And it is tough. I mean, there's no way around it.
Do you take, when you say your daughters and your dog, I share both those too, but do you take mental health breaks daily or weekly? Do you have any kind of practice to get kind of away from all of the things that you're writing about, that you're covering, which are, of course, really, really tough? I mean, a lot of people are just ignoring it almost entirely, I think, unfortunately.
I do. I mean, I just try to, at night I try to watch a lot of sports and just not think about politics too much. I mean, you can't do it all the time. I mean, somebody asked me today, "Do you watch this? There's some CNN special about all the president's lies," and I said, "I can't watch that, man."
Right.
I experience it every day. I just can't even. That just you have to walk away from once in a while, and you have to joke about it. I mean, one thing I enjoy about Twitter is that I can sort of joke about some of the stuff, because it is actually, yesterday, if you saw this, Trump had this thing where he was signed an act that was creating this centennial coin to mark women's suffrage, and he said, "We never did this before until I became president."
No,
it's a centennial coin. Every 100 years it happens. That's why it happened, you idiot. I mean, this is just like, he's such a moron, and it's like you can't joke about this.
All right,
and just almost find it amusing. I don't know how you can survive.
Yeah, well, that's what I love. I love your jokes on Twitter. Very funny, very insightful as always. At SpeechBoy71. That's how I discovered you. I was like, this guy's great on Twitter.
Thank you.
So before I let you go, you wrote recently about you of course, covering the election, the campaign, Democratic campaign. Is Michael Bloomberg inspiring anybody? Who's a Michael Bloomberg supporter?
I have a column coming out today about this, that basically saying that I think his only constituency is altruistic billionaires. That seems to be about it.
So he's got four.
I mean, what a joke! What an absolute joke of a candidacy. I mean, nobody wants this. Nobody is rooting for this. This is all about his ego. He's going to drop hundreds of millions of dollars on a race that he's
and
not
he could be spending
win.
it. He's done such a good job funding the gun control, the climate, and I don't know what else he's done, but I mean, that money. Same thing, by the way. Same argument for Tom Steyer. I mean, take your money. Your money is so much more valuable elsewhere. Let me just ask you then about Pete Buttigieg. So, if this guy is polling so low with black voters, like 0% in South Carolina, which is the first state in the Democratic primaries where I guess black voters really matter, because the first two are Iowa and New Hampshire. So is there any way that this guy or anybody could win without the support of black Democratic primary voters?
No. I mean, now it's possible he may win over black voters, but I don't, probably not. No, I don't think. But anything's possible. But I think what I will say is that if he cannot win over black voters, he cannot win the nomination. You just can't do it. You have to win. Black voters are the most important constituency of the Democratic Party. They are, I won't say the largest because there are more white voters than black voters, but certainly they are a very, very important constituency. And if you are getting 0% of them in South Carolina, which suggests you're not going to do much better in other states with large black populations, you're not going to be the nominee of the party.
If you bent over backwards to try to give him the older black voter, the kind of Clinton, Obama, even black voter, but I haven't seen any of the young, I follow the black Twitter and the websites and so are there, maybe there are, but who are the young, influential grassroots black activists on social media or writing anywhere? Like Michael Harriot at The Root just destroyed Pete Buttigieg, quoted him, and then used the adjective, said it whitely. And I mean, is anybody supporting him in media that is on, black Twitter?
I mean, I'm sure he has a few supporters. I'm sure
he's got to get grassroots young black people to vote, to support him, to win over. He can't just have the Clinton, Obama. That's what I'm trying to say. And I just don't see that happening.
Look, I mean, the older Obama Clinton voters who voted, black voters are supporting Joe Biden.
Right.
And I think, and I don't see how he takes those voters away from Joe Biden. I just don't see it. And look, this is going to be a controversial thing to say, but I think, they spoke to came out a few weeks ago and said a big issue was the fact that Buttigieg is gay. And the reality is that, same-sex marriage has less support among African voters than pretty much any other group on the Democratic side.
That sucks.
It does, but I think that's also part of the problem that he's dealing with.
Yeah, no doubt.
He hasn't made much of an outreach to them, and I think there are some issues that would make it. He should
send his husband out there to help.
That's not going to help. I mean, I think, by the way, the fact that he's doing so well right now is a good reminder of how ridiculous it is that Iowa and New Hampshire are the first two states that vote. This is literally an all-white population in both states. Not completely, but almost all white, and not representative of the Democratic Party, not representative of the country.
Wasn't it weird when I love Elizabeth Warren, but I thought it was weird when, I don't know if you saw it, when she told Amy Goodman's Democracy Now's Amy Goodman asked her about that. What do you think of the system having these first two states, which are, have no diversity really? They're all white. And Elizabeth Warren was like, "Hey, I'm just a player in the game." Did you see that?
I mean, what else is she going to say? You
can't say, listen, I love the people of Iowa. I love the people of New Hampshire, but a more equitable system would be one where blankety blank states would,
No, she cannot say that.
She can't.
She cannot say that. Because then you're gonna piss those voters off.
Well, those people, what are they holding? What are Iowa, and are they really clinging to that they're first? They really think? Yes. Why does anybody get to think that they deserve to decide? Anybody ever?
Because, I mean, it's the most ridiculous thing ever. They hold on to the idea that they get to go first, as if it's the most important thing in the world. And no politician who wants to be president is ever going to suggest they shouldn't go first, because if you do that, you're not going to win those states. So, they're holding the party captive. I wish that look, the reason why they did South Carolina and Nevada are so early was so that there would be more diverse locations that were getting to choose the nominee, which is good. So, I mean, look, in years past, South Carolina has actually been, I would argue 2008 and 2016, the South Carolina was the decisive state. Because don't forget, Obama wins Iowa, loses New Hampshire, then he wins South Carolina, and that's the momentum he needs to go on with the nomination.
Right.
For Clinton, she won Iowa, lost New Hampshire, but she crushes in South Carolina, gets her momentum. So South Carolina is actually pretty important. And right now, Joe Biden's leading by like 30 points in South Carolina. I mean, just for what it's worth, which I think is one of the reasons why he's still probably the best bet to be the nominee.
I love talking to you. Can I call you from time to time?
You can call anytime you want to be. Anytime.
Follow him on Twitter at SpeechBoy71. Subscribe to his newsletter, which is awesome. Truth and Consequences. Read him at the Boston Globe, and his books are great. We should just talk about clear and present safety next time. But I wanted to have you on the podcast to introduce you to folks who are new, who weren't familiar with you, and love talking to you, man, and love reading you.
Always great
Appreciate
talking to you.
you.
I always enjoy it.
Thank you, sir. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Talk to you later.
All right, we go from the great Michael Cohen to my next guest, who is a really cool guy. West Point grad, a former FBI special agent, Joint Terrorism Task Force member, U.S. Army infantry officer. You may have seen him on MSNBC. Lots of really important issues and ideas to talk about with a cybersecurity, national security expert. Here's my conversation with Clint Watts. Very excited to have Clint Watts joining me again. Well, for the first time on the podcast. He was always on the SiriusXM show, and I love talking to experts, and he is an expert. Clint, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Pete.
All right, so you are now working, or I guess running, this Foreign Policy Research Institute, and you guys have a project called the Foreign Influence Election 2020 Project, FIE 2020 Project. Tell me what that is.
Yeah, so if you look back to 2015, 2016, I was working with a team and we had stumbled onto the Russians going into the election, right, on social media. But this time we don't really have that luxury, right? We didn't have 2 years to figure out who the Russians were. A lot of their accounts have been shut down. So I oftentimes see people talking about Russian bots or spying them, but they don't necessarily know what those accounts are coming from. So to kind of solve that problem, I always tell people, look at what Russia says overtly, and then you can go out into social media and try and find what they're doing covertly. Start with what they say about the candidates, and you'll be surprised. You can actually start to pick out where those messages surface, because sometimes they make mistakes or twist things in a weird way. So to do that, I had a team of interns, all volunteers, about 22 of them to start. And going back to about June, we set up this process where each day we go and take all of the stories from Russia Today, Sputnik News, Press TV out of Iran, and Global Times of China. We download those if they talk about the election or the candidates or the president in the context of the election. And then we read them and code them into a survey form based on about 15 different questions. And so we built up now over 3,600 stories since January 1 about the candidates. And that was the first batch we put out just this past week, which is what do the Russians say, or how do they think about the Democratic candidates. And you can start to see, some trend lines through there after about 3,000 mentions of all the candidates on the Democratic side. You can start to see what those trend lines look like.
So you're looking into not only Russia, but potential interference from Iran or China as well.
Yes, because they keep, they come up. Iran's had a long history of doing very similar propaganda efforts, overt, covert social media, hacking. And in the same way, you hear a lot about China. You'll hear oftentimes Republicans say, China does this too, China does this too. And so we're going to record the data to show you like how it is different from maybe a Russia or Iran, but also if they do start to influence around the election, hopefully we can spot that as well.
Clint, let's just go back, though, to 2016. There's no doubt in your mind, there's no doubt apparently in the mind of the entire national security apparatus of the United States government that Russia interfered in our election to try to help Donald Trump get elected. Is that accurate?
Zero doubt. And in fact, if I had this same kind of project from 2015, 2016, just in terms of the media articles, and we did collect a lot of that, there's no arguing with it. I mean, Russia does not hide that they wanted Trump to win and Clinton to lose. And you could read their own media in that case. You can listen to Vladimir Putin. He will tell you that. I mean, he's gone on stage and said, yes, I wanted Donald Trump to win. So it's interesting. There's this pushback about Russian interference after all of these years years, how many intelligence assessments, the Mueller, report, we have all of these references, and it still just kind of keeps lingering back. And it really is playing into the impeachment hearings just this past week.
So in terms of the research that you guys have done at the Foreign Policy Research Institute that you've led, what are you seeing and what are you hearing in terms of which candidates they like and want to support and which candidates they want to tarnish and sully? Is that the right question?
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. So they very much would like to see another Trump presidency. But at the same point, they realize they don't control the entire election, right? They can nudge it a little bit, on the margins, but they actually don't decide the election. They understand that they can't do that. So they start to push and pull on different candidates. And when we looked at our first look was just at the Democratic field. Overwhelmingly, Joe Biden is, surfaces the most. If you look at just any of the candidates in the back of the field, he's mentioned about 5 to 6 times more than them. And that's always the first thing I look at is who just shows up the most in terms of volume. Russia doesn't waste time in their overt media talking about candidates they don't care about. So sometimes you'll even see like Castro, for example, doesn't get many mentions because they're actually not really that focused on him. You got to be up over probably, 50, 60 to even 100 mentions before they're actually signaling like they do care about this candidate's views. The second part then is, are they more favorable or less favorable? In general, Russia, their state-sponsored outlets aren't that dissimilar from American news outlets. And about 70% of the time, on average, they have very neutral comments. And then, most articles, if they are more of the journalist bent, would say, this is what one side says, this is what the other side says, right? So a positive a comment maybe, and then a negative comment. When you aggregate those, though, over time, you can start to see these shifts. And what you see very clearly is a strong negative trend line towards Biden. Biden, at least so far in the 2020 election run-up, is what Hillary Clinton was in the 2016 election. You can see that very clearly. Other interesting trends are Bernie Sanders, for example. They were very positive. If I had run this in 2015-16, I imagine Sanders would have turned out the most positive, in the field by far. But this time around, that's not really the case. They're pretty neutral on Bernie Sanders, which I find interesting from their perspective. And then, in terms of favorability, Tulsi Gabbard gets far less mentions than any of the top people in the field, but she's the only one that gets more favorable than negative and more favorable than neutral, which is interesting. You're talking about 60, somewhere in the neighborhood of a little over 60 mentions. And just that they see her as an opportunity. What she says is very divisive on the political left. And so when you're looking at a strategy for 2020 and who you want to advance, you want to, secure the base and divide the opposition. And she plays that role. Many of her messages are what Russia wants America hearing from other Americans. And so she suits that. I don't think she's an agent of Russia. I see that thrown around a lot. But she's carrying a message that is what Russia wants Americans to hear.
So I want to ask you a question that you do not have to be a national security expert like yourself to answer, but it's still, I think, an important, relevant question, and I really want to get what your take is on it. There was a time, most of the history of this country, I think, even at the founding of this country, we all agreed that foreign interference in our elections was bad because a foreign country could want to try to get an American political candidate, leader, to do something that's in its interest and not necessarily in the American public's interest. Up until recently, this was not a liberal thing or a conservative thing. It wasn't a Republican idea or a Democratic idea. We all agreed. It would not be good for America, the American public, for our own interests to allow any foreign government from the United Kingdom to Australia to Israel or Canada to interfere, intervene, or even donate to American politicians. This president has on the record said he would welcome it. He said that to George Stephanopoulos. The question is, what changed in terms of the public's interest and understanding of the threat of foreign government's intervention in our elections?
I think we don't communicate with the American public about the danger. So it's not well articulated. What is the dangers of, let's say, a Russia or another country influencing our election and us buddying up with them for ways that are really about personal gain? I think in the president's case, it's more what it is, not American gain. It's not articulated well. And so I have to say to even like the Democratic candidates and people on the Hill that are arguing against this, you're not making a strong case to the public for why this is a problem. And you could. The reason it's a problem is we lose our place in the world as the defender of democracy, of the freedom of speech, protecting freedoms, human rights. We're losing that and retreating on the world stage. And so that retreat tarnishes us with allies. It hurts us economically. We will find ourselves losing out in all these relationships, whether they're diplomatic, business, military. And it puts us in a weakened position that over time, not only have we eroded ourselves internally and we can't mobilize the population against threats, but we also cannot find partners to help us when something catastrophic happens, like a climate change, automation, a post 9/11 era, or when there's a market collapse. Those things were built on treaties. They were built on alliances. They were built on networks, interlinkages with other countries. That's how we weather those storms. And all of those linkages are eroding rapidly right now. And that's where that foreign influence comes in. Russia right now is using the impeachment hearing, for example, not only to spread disinformation in the U.S. about the 2016 election and the Bidens, but they're also driving a wedge between us and Ukraine. In Ukraine, their message is you can't trust the Americans, that they're shifty, they'll back out on you, they'll try and abuse you for power. That message is true, right? They're using that to their value. And that's how foreign influence can really corrode our country.
I've heard a lot of reporters as well as pundits and other experts say that what we are seeing last week and what we've been seeing a lot of for weeks now, probably over a year, is we're seeing the president, we're seeing Republicans and his supporters in the media do what is in Russia's interest. They're carrying out Russia's own conspiracy theory for them. The president of the United States is doing exactly what Putin and his intelligence services want us to do, which is to create this narrative that it was Ukraine that interfered in the 2016 election, not Russia, and that they interfered in the election for Hillary Clinton. Ukraine for Hillary Clinton. And Trump, Devin Nunes, and all of the Republicans on the Intel Committee during the impeachment inquiry, and Sean Hannity and the rest of them are repeating that. But the folks that aren't repeating that are those diplomats and foreign service officers who have been testifying, I think most significantly, Fiona Hill, stating this is what they're doing. Clint, do you line up with that? Is that your opinion? Is that what is happening?
Yes. The reason this disinformation is working is because Americans are delivering that disinformation into the American bloodstream. It's remarkable that this would happen. More than 2.5 years ago, I was at the Senate and I said, they asked me why, Senator Langford said, why does this work? And I said, well, it's because President Trump uses Russian active measures against his opponents, right? Like he's a vehicle for it inside the United States. And so it's just happening on scale now. Russia could not advance this narrative alone by just tossing it out into the social media bloodstream. It has to have other Americans that take it on, own it, and use it for their own purposes and advance it. And it's what we see on a mass scale today in the United States. And I'm sure they're shocked, even from Moscow, they're shocked that this continues to occur and that it works. They just can't believe that Americans would use this sort of propaganda to hurt other Americans. And as long as it stays that way, it becomes very difficult for us to navigate as a country, and we're torn apart from the inside. That's the whole idea of active measures. Defeat you through the force of politics rather than the politics of force.
Everybody should go to fpri.org. That is your project, your initiative, the Foreign Policy Research Institute, where you have this project up that is pointing to the threat and offering ideas and solutions. Your solutions, however, I suspect have to be implemented by government, by the United States Senate. Specifically, I would imagine they can't be implemented from the private sector. Am I making that too binary?
It's a triad, actually. The government has to lead, right? They have to set the standards. They have to establish the norms politically. You got to pass the Honest Ads Act, the Election Integrity Act, the provision that Warner added to a bill, which was not to take help from a foreign power. Those have to be passed, right? What you're seeing, though, as this plays out...
I'm sorry, Clint, why would there have to be a provision in a bill preventing an American politician from taking help from a foreign actor? Isn't that in the Constitution? Isn't that somewhere else already?
Yeah, you would think it is, right? But there isn't a specific law, essentially, that you can enforce on this. If, for say, Russia says, you know what? Here in Ukraine, it was the Ukrainians that were helping 2016, and the president or any politician says, look over there. It says here that the Ukrainians were helping. That is very, very difficult to show that is taking support or help from a foreign power if it's out there in the open. And that's what's been remarkable to watch, is most of this is happening right in front of our faces. And all it would take would be elected leaders saying, you know what, we're not going to use stolen emails, for example. We're not going to run campaign ads about things that are stolen from our opponents. Those are the norms and standards that we have to have from our elected leaders. If you look at what's going on between Facebook and Twitter right now in terms of what can run on their platforms, right? That is because the Honest Ads Act was not passed. It's because there has not been a regulation passed in Congress. And so you're seeing each company have to make their own decision about whether or not to take on political advertising. So while, Mark Zuckerberg's awkward and he comes off weird and he sometimes, just is off-putting in terms of what he's saying, I'm sympathetic oftentimes to what he's saying, which is, if you don't want us messing with algorithms or biasing towards one way or the other, you got to tell us what to police. And so I think with his political ads, he's saying, look, tell me what is and is not allowed in this country, and I'll abide by it. That's the background. If you look at Twitter, they're saying basically the same thing, but they're also like, we don't want to have to make this decision, so we're just going to get rid of it altogether. And behind that, you can look at the profit motives. It's very different. There's a lot more money to be made for ads on Facebook than there is with ads on Twitter. So I'm somewhat sympathetic. Sometimes these tech companies, they feel like they're getting beat up in both directions. And the worst offenders in terms of disinformation on their platforms are usually the elected officials that are screaming at them from Capitol Hill.
Clint Watts, always a pleasure. I appreciate your time. Check out his book, Messing with the Enemy, his TED Talk. Go to the organization's website, fpri.org. Follow him on Twitter, @SelectedWisdom. I so appreciate your time and your work and what you're doing to try to protect us from foreign interference in our elections, as well as educate everybody. So we don't have any excuses if we're listening to you. Thanks, Clint.
Thank you.
I love that guy, Clint Watts. Thank you very much, Clint Watts. Follow him on Twitter, @SelectedWisdom. And at the end of today's podcast, I want to read to you a poem. I was about to read it when my friend CJ Eichinger logged into my computer to help me with the edit here. And so I ended up reading it to him. He's hilarious and awesome. So here is that. I can't believe I pressed stop. I was just be my guest. I've got CJ helping me do tech right now. Now I'm recording. He's awesome. CJ Eichinger, everybody. I was about to read the Don't Quit poem.
Don't quit.
I had this poem on my high school wall, and then in my college dorm rooms, and then in my New York City apartments. It was all worn down and torn up. The same copy that was given to me by the Syracuse University head lacrosse coach, Roy Simmons Jr. He gave it to everybody. The Don't Quit
It was
poem.
The last thing he gave you before he cut you from the team.
No, he never considered me for the Syracuse lacrosse team at all.
Never quite got that far.
No, but he definitely respected my grit. You want to hear it?
Are you going to do it with music?
I have cheesy music I can play. It's a cheesy poem, and I have cheesy music.
It's up to you. It's not like I can leave.
Here we go. You like that?
So far.
Don't quit. When things go wrong, as they sometimes will, CJ, when the road you're trudging seems all uphill, when the funds are low and the debts are high and you want to smile, but you have to sigh, when care is pressing you down a bit, rest if you must, but don't you quit. Life is queer with its twists and turns, as every one of us sometimes learns, and many a failure turns about when he might have won had he stuck it out. Don't give up, though the pace seems slow. You may succeed with another blow. Often the goal is nearer than it seems to a faint and faltering man. Often the struggler has given up when he might have captured the victor's cup. And he learned too late when the night slipped down how close he was to the golden crown. Because success is failure, CJ, turned inside out. The silver tint of the clouds of doubt, and you never can tell how close you are. It may be near. It seems so far. So stick to the fight when your heart is hit. It's when things seem the worst that you must never, ever quit. Woo! Never quit! Never give up! Never say die!
I was just watching 30th Cutest Kitten Moments on YouTube.
Oh.
Best.
Oh, that's right.
Did you finish your poem yet?
All right, I'm out. All right, I'll end that recording now. What did you think of that? Hold on. So quite a performance, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was good. I probably would have brought the music down a little bit.
Oh, all right. Well, we can do that in post. All right.
We'll fix it in post.
Okay, that is it. That's the whole episode today. Thank you. Hope you liked it. Thank you to Clint Watts. Thank you to Michael Cohen. Thank you to CJ Eichinger for helping me out as well. Sign up on Patreon. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic. And on Friday, we're going to have the great Peter Coyote? Peter Coyote. That's right. The legend. A lot of you have asked for him, including my wife. Had a great private conversation with him on, Tuesday night? Friday, he will be my guest if all things go well. We get it recorded and in the can. Look him up if you don't know who he is. He does the voiceovers for the Ken Burns documentaries. He's a great actor. He's in E.T., so many other films. And he's a Buddhist monk or priest. Been meditating for 45 years. Just an amazing social justice, human rights. Very intelligent guy. Love him. Today's podcast has been brought to you by you. Thanks for your subscriptions on Patreon. Subscribe, tell your friends, give it a good rating, and we'll talk to you on Friday. Have a great, safe, happy Thanksgiving with your friends and family. I love you. Be the change that you want to see in the world, everybody.